In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Well, as I said before the service started, now in Wisconsin, 16 winters, I'm always blown away by the people that live here's ability to get to church, even after a snowstorm. And it always snows on Saturday night. It doesn't snow on Tuesday or Wednesday, it's Saturday. So, in the ordination path, which is not very much fun, they ask you, the Commission on Ministry will say, well, when did you first know that you thought you should be a priest or deacon? And I can now look back and realize the time spent as a choir boy and an altar boy in England when I was very little probably had a big impact on me. But when I was in Arizona, that was where it all started to come together in the mid-90s. And the church I was attending, the rector had a style for his sermons. He would tell a story, and then he would sort of analyze the gospel as it was intended 2,000 years ago, and then sort of tell people how that would impact their lives. And I think it stuck with me because most Sundays that's the pattern I follow. And today I'd like to begin with a modern day parable written by a Lutheran pastor, Paul Nectarline, originally offered as part of his sermon on today's gospel, delivered at Grace Lutheran in Howell, Michigan, January 31st, 1993. So right about the time I was starting this path or continuing it. And the story goes like this. Once upon a time, there was a kingdom of people who pursued happiness. Nothing was more important to them than being happy. The pursuit of happiness was written into their charter. And the happier they became, the happier they wanted to be. The source of the people's happiness was a magic happiness machine. Whenever the people felt unhappy, they would pour their troubled feelings into the happiness machine. The magic machine would melt down their feelings and purify them. The residue of their troubles became waste, and that was drained away and dumped into a distant part of the kingdom. The people would take their purified feelings and go away singing and feeling happy again. The years went by, and the happy people became happier and happier because of the wonderful effects of the happiness machine. There was only one problem. Another group of people lived in a distant part of the kingdom, the part where all the waste was being dumped. The waste made those people very unhappy. And the more waste that was dumped, the unhappier they became. Unfortunately, these poor, unhappy people were not permitted to use the happiness machine, because the one thing the magic machine could not do was purify its own waste. The unhappy people complained to the happy people about the problems they had with the waste, but the happy people ignored their complaints. When they were confronted with the terrible results of their happiness, the happy people simply took their troubled feelings to the happiness machine, and it made them all happy again. It was easy to believe that it was not the waste of their own troubles that made the other people unhappy. Rather, they convinced themselves that the unhappy people were just incurably unhappy. and that they had nobody but themselves to blame for their unhappiness. It was not long before the unhappy people began to protest more insistently about their situation, demanding that waste be removed from their part of the kingdom. But the happy people turned a deaf ear to their protests, which only served to make the unhappy people angrier, and they protested all the more, putting a severe drain on the happy people's happiness. All these new troubles made the happiness machine work even harder. So the happy people had to produce an even bigger and better happiness machine, and the waste from this larger happiness machine piled up higher and higher and spread farther and farther into other parts of the kingdom. The happiness machine grew so large and productive that there was no place left on earth to put the waste. Now the happy people were threatened not only by the rebellion of the unhappy people, but also by their own happiness machine and its growing piles of waste. You may have already guessed that this parable represents our society and its real-life happiness machines, which are the structures and institutions of our society. They belong to us. They work for us. They produce food and clothing, cars and housing, resorts and recreation, law and order. Their purpose is to make us happy. But our happiness machines do not make everybody happy. They also produce waste. They produce poverty, unemployment, underemployment, and inadequate housing, health, and education. I would like to suggest that this fable is in fact no fable at all, but a story about the real world in which we live. Without a doubt, this parable leaves much to interpret, and some may disagree with its overall premise. I want to use it today, however, to illustrate the stark contrast between the very different view of happiness that Jesus offers in this morning's gospel. In many biblical translations, the word blessed is translated as happy, which changes the Beatitudes to read, happy are the poor in spirit. Happy are those who mourn. Happy are the meek, and so on. Once again, Jesus' radical viewpoint on society offers people who he predicts will eventually be happy, and they are not those that we would generally think as people who are happy. In fact, it was likely that Jesus was speaking to people in his Sermon on the Mount who, in terms of the earlier parable, were the ones who got society's waste dumped on them. Real happiness, according to Jesus, is to be found among those whose society typically forgets or ignores. The Beatitudes are Christ's own promises of coming blessings, and they indicate the kind of behavior required by all Christians while speaking to the moral and spiritual qualities of Christian discipleship. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount not only blesses or beatifies the poor and the meek, the oppressed and the persecuted, it also offers remedies for the condition that afflicts these people. The second part of each beatitude offers solutions as to how the affliction will be relieved by its corresponding blessing. Can the Sermon on the Mount teach us in the 21st century how to live in a different way? Just as all baptized Christians can be reminded of their duties as a Christian by their baptismal vows, and as every deacon, priest, and bishop are also reminded of their responsibilities to the community by their ordination vows, the Beatitudes offer all Christians patterns of how to live our lives. So as we approach the holy season of Lent, now might be a good time to start to think about what discipline, addition, or subtraction to our piety that might be appropriate this year. Don't come to me and tell me you gave up horseradish ice cream and broccoli. It's supposed to be something that you will miss. I'm more of a fan of not necessarily giving up things. I like the idea of adding stuff, spiritual stuff. Let's take, for instance, spiritual direction, which recommends that all Christians adopt a rule of life. I'm fairly certain Father Mike could probably give us an entire sermon on what a rule of life is. But what is it? It is a plan, a commitment, a structure on how to live our lives in a particular way. A rule of life is meant to be crafted through prayer and discernment in partnership with God, and then written down both as an exercise and as a reminder of what it is we are committing to do. Once crafted, a rule of life serves as a tool that can help us make decisions for our lives, while providing a guide on how best to order our days, at least during Lent. Start there. One idea for a rule of life is to focus on our baptismal vows. They are in a Book of Common Prayer. I know you've got one next to your bed at home. But we can take that to the next level and blend the baptismal vows with the Beatitudes. Together, these two really important aspects of our faith can provide a roadmap for the challenges and difficulties that life inevitably throws our way. They also provide ways in which we as Christians can help to make other people's lives better, while not burdening them with the waste from our happiness machine. If you need any help with this, let me know. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.